distinguished leaders, representatives of states and governments, and all those who still pay attention to the work of the United Nations. We must admit the world's attention to the UN is fading. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, about the tools that sadly are not working now. But they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active, if we are active, because the main tool is in your hands. First of all, I thank the Republic of Korea for this meeting of the Security Council and for the opportunity to call for peace. Today, there will be a clear call for peace in this Council. And here is one of the main distortions of our time. Whom must we call to peace, and on whom must we press to achieve it? One of the permanent members of this Council is doing everything to prolong the largest war in Europe since World War II. Russia does this with impunity, using its veto power, buying influence, and keeping peace on hold. The Russian representatives is here, but of course not the one who makes the real decisions. That man fears to sit face to face with Ukraine and the world and openly admit he wants only war. Instead, Putin sends delegates who cannot and don't want to stop the bloodshed. And when he appears abroad, in Beijing or somewhere else, it's only to buy more time for killing, pretending he seeks diplomacy. Putin only cares about using every meeting, every chance to keep the war going. Each day Russia kills our people, destroys our cities, and leaves no sign it will ever return to the principles of the UN Charter. China is also represented here, a powerful nation on which Russia now depends completely. If China truly wanted this war to stop, it could compel Moscow to end the invasion. Without China, Putin's Russia is nothing. Yet too often, China stays silent and distant instead of active for peace. The United States of America is present here as well, a strong nation that supports our defense, and we've said yes to every proposal from the US president for a ceasefire and talks with Russia to bring peace. But Russia always says no, or tries to confuse everyone so that even a ceasefire can't happen. And I met with President Trump just now, and we spoke about how to finally bring peace, and we discussed a few good ideas, and I hope they will work. And I'm grateful for this meeting, and we expect America's actions to push Russia toward peace. Moscow fears America and always pays attention to it. The United Kingdom is here, a permanent member of the Security Council. France is here, also a permanent member. Both nations support us, support our people, our independence. Both promote diplomacy, and both are parties to a document that was supposed to be a positive milestone, together with the other permanent members of the UN Security Council. But instead, it became a warning to the world. The Budapest Memorandum, meant to guarantee Ukraine's security in exchange for giving up nuclear weapons, failed. It proved that international promises can turn into blabbering. That is why today, with Britain, with France, and already with more than 30 nations in our coalition of willings, we are building a new security architecture. We count on the United States of America as a backstop. Real security guarantees must become the line Russia cannot cross again. Here is one example of how strength can stop war If we could strengthen our skies with a joint system to shut down Russian missiles and drones, it would force Russia to stop its attack from the sky, because everything could be shut down, and so Putin would be forced to sit here or in another respectable venue and look for a truce on the ground. If there is no war in the sky, Russia can't keep fighting on the ground. I have talked about this with President Trump and with other leaders. Why do I say this now and here? Because you, the United States, China, Britain, France, the permanent members of the Security Council, represent the world's essential power, the power that must act when international law alone cannot. And no, not Russia. With this war, Russia has discredited itself, even for those who do not yet criticize Putin openly. They still feel that Russia's presence brings no good. Excellencies, behind every international institution, there must be real strength to enforce decisions. This is true for the Security Council and for the UN as a whole. If you stand together for ending this war, even Russia will have to obey. And if some of you act while others delay, the war goes on. Ukraine wants peace more than anyone in the world. The front is on our land, and we mourn our people, and we try to save our cities and to save our small villages. Russia ignores its dead, blind to its own losses. But one day, it will see and it will hear, and it will happen when it sees your actions, when it hears your united call for peace. That is my appeal to you today. Be the force that act together, please, united lest to stop Russia's war. And we know how to guarantee security. What we need now is a strong push to force Russia toward peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
All of you for convening here today on this important matter. When President Trump took office, he made it among his highest priorities the restoration of peace anywhere and everywhere in the world where the opportunity presented itself. And it's met with great success in a number of places. We had a conflict between India and Pakistan, which was a very dangerous conflict, and one that he chose to engage in and was able to bring it to, be very involved in bringing it to a cessation of hostilities. When Thailand and Cambodia were engaged in hostilities, the president got involved over a weekend over in the United States, and were able to play a critical role in that regard as well. We are very grateful to some of the countries in this room that were helpful in that regard with the DRC and Rwanda, and work remains to be done. But again, a conflict that presents grave dangers and extraordinary humanitarian challenges. With Azerbaijan and Armenia as well. He has become involved, and we were able to sign an agreement at the White House very recently that hopefully prevents a future conflict which would prove costly and deadly. But the one that's proved to be an extraordinary challenge has been the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. The president has worked on it tirelessly, has invested a tremendous amount of his own time, energy, and the highest levels of our government. We have had meetings in Turkey, meetings in Saudi Arabia, meetings in Alaska, countless phone calls, doing everything possible to bring this conflict to a resolution and to an end. A war that cannot end militarily. It will end at a negotiating table. That's where this war will end. But the longer it lasts, the more people will die, the more will be destroyed. Some of the numbers we are seeing in the loss of life among military personnel, for example, on the Russian Federation side, are staggering. Staggering. In 1 month alone, more loss of life than in the entirety of the U.S. engagement in Afghanistan or Iraq. This war has to end, and we have done everything we possibly can, and will continue to do everything we possibly can to bring it to an end. Very generous offers have been made. For example, a ceasefire at the current lines of contact, while all the other details on the future of the conflict could be worked out in terms of future territorial lines. The president has shown extraordinary patience in terms of not assessing additional sanctions in the hopes of having a breakthrough in this regard. And all has come to what appears to be not just a stagnant one, but an era, and we've entered a period of what appears to be potential even escalation, with the historically highest number of strikes we've seen over the last few nights and before. And now we are also watching incursions into neighboring airspace by both drones and airplanes. The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end. He also has before him the option, as he has already chosen to do in some circumstances, to sell defensive weaponry and potentially offensive weaponry so that Ukraine can defend itself from this assault by purchasing that weaponry. So I'm here to say to the Security Council, the United States remains as committed as it has ever been to a peaceful resolution to this dangerous conflict. But there will come a moment in which we will have to conclude that perhaps there is no interest in a peaceful resolution. And then the president has before him real options, which he intends to pursue, as he has made clear today in some of the messages he has put out. So I strongly urge the Security Council, the member states here, and those who are not part of this as well, to do everything in their power, and including the Russian Federation, to do everything within their power, and the Ukrainian side for that matter as well, but all sides, to bring this war to an end before it becomes something that will last another 3 or 4 years, lead to more destruction, both economic and at the same time a loss of life and loss of property and loss of futures. This war needs to end. But if it does not, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States and President Donald J. Trump will take the steps necessary to impose costs for continued aggression. Thank you.
It is very much lamentable that the membership of the Security Council has been compelled today to spend time and be present at a meeting which was initiated by our European colleagues purely to mark the latest New York stop on the tour of the well-known former actor. And here we see squeezed in as during the subway at rush hour, where we hear and will continue to hear mere replicated statements which have nothing to do with the true. There's no added value for the establishment of peace in Ukraine generated from today's meeting, which is obvious. And this will merely become yet another shameful episode in the market of hypocrisy, which is seen in the presentation of the Ukrainian theme by European states. European sponsors of the Zelensky regime want the United Nations Security Council to live, as they do, in some kind of a parallel reality where Ukraine is not losing on the battlefield, losing city after city, and where Ukrainian citizens are queuing in line in order to die in the pointless slaughter for the advancement of Western geopolitical interests. This is a perverted picture which some are attempting to impose upon us. In this picture, Ukraine is an island of democracy and freedom. Its leader, usurper, broke his electoral pledge and has thrown thousands of fellow citizens into the dungeons. According to their picture, he is supported by all Ukrainians who apparently don't need any elections because they have such an outstanding president. Those who play into the hands of this Ukrainian puppeteer need to understand that essentially they're becoming complicit in the criminal manipulation, the purpose of which is to prevent a long-term just and lasting peace in Ukraine, which stipulates inter alia the development of such security guarantees that would preclude the threat of new conflict in Europe. This essentially is a conspiracy which is geared towards Ukrainians continuing to die, for Ukrainians to continue to die by the thousands in this senseless fratricidal slaughter which Western foes of the Russian Federation have been preparing for many years, seeking to weaken our country, to undermine our security and economic capability. What is unaddressed here is a perverse manifestation that is egregious for any civilized state and not a single country in the neighborhood or any self-respecting country would tolerate this. Essentially, what is proposed inter alia is for us to turn a blind eye to the Kiev marionettes who are blind are mad with Russophobia and the permissiveness of their suzerains. They are not even considering rejecting the persecution of Russian citizens of Ukraine who are prohibited, contrary to the constitution of the country, prohibited from speaking in their mother tongue and teaching their children in their mother tongue. And before our very eyes, people under threat of death and persecution are forced to deny their own identity, their moral, historical roots and values, and the so-called European democracies are clapping and cheering, baselessly alleging that Russia allegedly is trampling upon the identity of Ukrainian identity. But this was never our goal. This is an insolent lie advanced by the Kiev princeling to intimidate and brainwash the international community. It is proposed that we forget the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, emboldened by impunity, which seized power following a coup sponsored by the West in breach of the UN Charter, which fired upon defenseless people in the southeast of Ukraine, using tanks and weapons, throwing bombs on them, and burning people alive in the trade union building, and mocking them just because they're Russian and refused to accept the misanthropic ideology of the Kiev regime. And then the regime for 7 years under the smokescreen of the Minsk agreements was armed to the teeth, provided with intelligence data and prepared for war with Russia, as was acknowledged by a number of European politicians who were directly complicit here. And we are called upon not to notice how Ukraine is glorifying those who, during the war, together with the Nazis, destroyed hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, Russians, Roma, Ukrainians, and not to notice how Ukrainian partners of Kiev shamefully are casting down their eyes when they see etched on the bodies of neo-Nazi Ukrainian fighters swastikas and other Nazi or neo-Nazi symbolism, which is prohibited in their own countries. Mr. President, in order to try to force the world to think on the basis of their own grotesque paradigm, the history, in their view, began in February 2022. They do not wish to recall the violations of the pledge not to expand NATO eastward, about the indivisibility of security, to expunge from people's memories the fact that of what they wrought in Kiev in 2014, cherry-picking from the UN Charter a single principle about respect for territorial integrity of states, forgetting about sovereign equality, non-intervention in domestic affairs, and the right of peoples to self-determination. They see a problem only in actions, which became a response to their own steps. On the go, they are supplanting international law with the so-called rules-based order, which is based on rules which they themselves concoct and impose upon others. The Ukrainian crisis is the direct result of their actions and their acts, which have been undertaken over the course of many years, despite all of our warnings and calls to disembark from that path, which is leading to catastrophe for that country. Today, this catastrophe is absolutely clear to all who, seeking to save their own skin, and the head of the Kiev regime who brought them to power. They are trying to undermine the efforts to establish a long-term peace in Ukraine. This country is not only has large-scale corruption, complete lawlessness, but also egregious double standards, which the collective West and media outlets under their control demonstrate in the Ukrainian context. Nowhere in the world, in no other context, has there been such consistent disregard for the indisputable violations of international humanitarian law by the Kiev regime, who have been using civilians as human shields and placing air defense systems in direct proximity to residential areas. This is resulting in tragedies linked to wreckage falling on homes from errant air defense missiles, which in any other which would not have happened because Russian aerospace capabilities, as was repeatedly seen, are carrying out purely high-precision strikes targeting objects related to military and industrial capabilities of the Kiev regime. Moreover, in the majority of cases, these are responses to Ukrainian drone strikes targeting civilian objects in Russian cities, deliberately shelling Ukrainian deliberate shelling by Ukrainian nationalists of homes, schools, kindergartens, and hospitals, which people in the West are attempting not to notice. Unfortunately, this is also being indulged by the UN Secretariat, where any allegations from Kiev are supported, and the grim statistics which have been presented by Russia are disregarded. And this is an egregious violation of Article 100 of the UN Charter, which instructs UN staff to be objective. And this policy brings no honor to Antonio Guterres. It is clear to all that the EU and NATO are in a sticky situation with their anti-Russian Ukrainian project. They're confused and entangled, and they don't really know how to extricate themselves from the situation which they themselves placed themselves in. Washington was the first to see the light after the new administration took up its duties. However, instead of joining the efforts to establish peace in Brussels and allied capitals, they continue due to either inertia or deliberately to fan the flames of the war continuously without any justification. They are mendaciously portraying Russia as a enemy, which inevitably will attack them as soon as it finishes off Ukraine. Today, this party of war lost sleep, trying to derail to undermine the results and understandings that were arrived at during the meeting of the Russian and U.S. presidents in Alaska 1 month ago, generating hysteria, including in this chamber in connection with the unsubstantiated allegations about the incursion into Poland of alleged Russian drones and alleged overflight in Estonia of Russian fighter jets. This is a brainwashing and indoctrination, attempts to blame Russia for their shortcomings and errors, and for their acute socioeconomic problems, which European communities. Which European societies face as a result of their own ill-conceived sanctions measures, only to be compared to the designs of German and Italian the Germans and the Italians during the Second World War. This is what this can be compared to. And this manipulations, and these manipulators, having learned a bitter lesson from history, throw up their hands and allege that they did not recognize what would happen as a result of their actions. Mr. President, the contours of the future peace in Ukraine are well known to all of us. And also what is clear is that the presentation of the Kiev regime about how this will look has nothing to do with reality, merely dooming thousands of Ukrainian citizens who do not wish to go to the front, dooming them to pointless death. Just yesterday on a Ukrainian television channel, one of the then propagandists lamented that many Ukrainians there were many Ukrainians rounded up on the streets, but they, I quote, they ran out quickly. And therein lies the cynical essence of the Kiev regime. Do you align yourselves with them when it comes to this an enviable plight of Ukrainian citizens who are still alive? If you are not indifferent to the plight of these people, then we are awaiting your support and genuine efforts in order to attempt to probe the contours of a realistic long-term, lasting peace to end this war which the criminal clique began in 2014. We are not abandoning any negotiations formats. We advocate purely serious, substantive, clear-sighted negotiations, nor are we rejecting negotiations with Ukraine, despite the highly dubious, to put it mildly, legitimacy of its current authorities. The optimal format for this has already been identified, that is negotiations platform in Istanbul, and the rest will be set out after experts lay down their groundwork. And unfortunately, there's a long road ahead. To conclude, I wish to recall the prophetical words which were uttered on the sidelines of High-Level Week of the General Assembly 2 years ago by Polish President Andrzej Duda. And I quote, "Ukraine is like a drowning man. It is dragging us into the depths." End of quote. Today, such drowning men are many of those who spoke in this chamber. If you accept this inglorious fate, then you can continue to do nothing and continue in the same vein. If not, then there's a great deal of work which lies ahead. We stand ready to do this work, and now it is up to you to make that choice. Thank you for your attention.